Have you ever wondered what goes into creating a superhero costume on screen? It's a lot more involved than you might think. It's not just a case of copying the comic book illustrations, and in fact, the two are often poles apart. And while a costume designer working on a superhero movie will look at the evolution of the costume on the page, it's a very small part of bringing the costume to the screen. For the comic book artists, it's unlikely they're thinking much further ahead than the blank page they have to fill. Artist Alan Davis has been prominent in the field for more than 30 years. He's worked for both DC and Marvel, and for him, it's about keeping things simple.
With a real-life costume, you can make it as detailed as you want and film it from every angle. I've got to draw it, so I don't want to draw a lot of detail. So simplicity is usually one of the things I consider. So it needs to be something that I can draw quickly and economically. They're just looking at something that's going to be flashy, so it's completely different.
But does Davis find he has to stick to a set of limitations, either because of the iconic nature of a character on the comic book page or because a certain style of artwork is considered sacred?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. The first criticism I got was make Batman's ears smaller. That I'd made them too big. It was make Batman's ears smaller and make women's noses smaller. That was the two criticisms I got on my first job.
Wow.
I was drawing women with real size noses. It didn't go down well at all.
For costume designer Lindy Hemming, who worked on the Batman films with Christopher Nolan and Wonder Woman with Patty Jenkins, the route to finished design and beyond is far more involved and labour intensive.
So my challenge is to create a world for the Amazon women which keyed into the end result, which is that Wonder Woman takes this costume and leaves the island of Themyscira and goes off into the world. So all of the costumes for the island of Themyscira needed to somehow make sense with this costume. Instead of it being a standalone thing, it came from some logical armour. My other challenges in this film were to bring the world which she then goes to save or help with, which is the First World War, to make it feel as absolutely real and horrible and muddy and dirty, and people were deprived and worn, and the real costumes of the Belgian village where the front was, so that when you see her in her superhero costume, you've accepted that costume, you accept it as more real and more believable, because the world she's entering is a real and believable world. So, and that's the sort of juxtaposition which you can say you want to do, and you can only know if it works when you watch it happening in the film.
It's probably safe to say it works, and the swathes of people who went to see the film will most likely agree. Although Lindy admits to taking inspiration from the pages of the comic books, she points out that what Alan Davis and other artists like him do is a different discipline. When she's designing for a film, Lindy's process is all-encompassing.
I mean, you must look at everything. I looked at ancient Greece, I looked at ancient Thrace, all these places, and then I also looked at the way that the people drawing the comic book art had obviously looked at the same things and how they'd interpreted them. And so you're every day allowing yourself a little bit of leeway when you design things, because you look to see what they did do and how that will be acceptable to the fans. You think, would they believe this? Would I believe it, if I saw it? So you do, of course, look back at the comics.
One of Lindy's favourite costumes she's worked on is Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. For Lindy, the challenge was conveying why he would have green hair and why his face looks the way it does, as well as why he would wear the clothes he does. She took inspiration from real-life dandies, as she calls them: Keith Richards, Sid Vicious, Pete Doherty and Malcolm McLaren. They all use or used the look of madness as a method of getting their own way. She borrowed ideas from fashion designers Vivienne Westwood and Alexander McQueen and eventually landed on Ledger's iconic look, with some input from Christopher Nolan, who was the brains behind the green waistcoat. Batman's costume was another more complicated matter. With Nolan intent on conveying gravity and bringing a patina of reality to the character and his story, Lindy had her work cut out. For Lindy, it was a case of trying to understand who the person that chooses to dress as the Batman really was, and that was her springboard. This meant that the costume had to be logical, practical, and modern. She took inspiration from the multi-layered materials used in the manufacture of Nike trainers specifically, shoes built for protection, flexibility, and to be lightweight. She investigated plastics, meshes, and metal meshes as ways to create depth. She also looked at military gear. Batman's cloak in particular was a challenge. She rejected Nolan's suggestion of velvet as a fabric because although it gave a look similar to the one she was after, it didn't move in the way she felt the cape should. So she ended up consulting costume designer Graham Churchard, known for his work on various Marvel and DC films, who suggested flocking kite fabric, which turned out to be just the ticket. And if you're in any doubt, picking fabrics isn't simple.
So you sort of make a room of fabrics, and you'd have your character pinned on the wall, what you think you're doing, and then your fabrics, as you choose them, you pin them beside it, and so slowly you build up a picture. Maybe if you're lucky enough, you find the perfect example, and then you get that printed, the fabric printed.
Next time you watch a superhero movie, you'll think twice before criticising the costumes, if that's your tendency. Now you know the lengths they go to get them just right. It's one thing to draw them on the page, bringing them to life on screen is a completely different thing altogether. Maybe you've always admired costume designers, but I'm willing to bet you've now got a renewed respect for the likes of Lindy Hemming and her contemporaries.